Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Okay, so let's talk about American English conversations. You might feel like, okay, I've studied the grammar, I've built up my vocabulary list, I can read pretty well, but then you actually listen to native speakers talking to each other, maybe quickly, maybe casually, and suddenly it feels like there's this whole other layer you're just not quite getting. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, absolutely. That's such a common feeling for learners. You can have all the building blocks, the words, the sentence structures, but understanding how they fit together in real-time speech with all the intonation, the cultural shortcuts, the things left unsaid, that's often the real challenge, isn't it?
It really is. It's like you know the notes on the page, but maybe you haven't quite caught the rhythm or the sort of emotional tone of the music.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It's the difference between knowing the ingredients and knowing how to cook the meal, how it all comes together with flavor and feeling.
Precisely. And that feeling, that gap, is exactly what we're diving into today. We've gathered quite a few different sources, articles, websites, even some discussion threads, looking at everything from, practical tools for improving your listening
To understanding those baffling American idioms.
Right. And then the real nitty-gritty of just everyday chats, greetings, ordering coffee, that kind of thing. Plus, we'll touch on accents and the cultural side of communication styles.
So the mission today, if you will,
Yes, our
is
neighbors.
to pull out the practical, usable knowledge from all this. Find those little aha moments, those insights that can help you listening right now feel, more confident, more clued in when you're in an American English conversation. Understanding those unwritten rules.
It's about moving beyond just decoding the words to actually grasping the intent, right? Seeing things through that cultural lens, even just a little bit.
Exactly. Not just passive hearing, but active understanding and engagement.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Where should we start? Maybe with the foundation. How do you actually get better at listening in the first place? We looked at a Fluent U article that laid out a whole bunch of resources.
Yeah, that was a good overview. It highlighted just how many options there are now, free and paid, for tuning your ear to English.
And what struck me wasn't just the list, but the variety. Why is having so many different types of resources so important, do you think?
Well, I think it comes down to the fact that language learning isn't, one size fits all. People learn differently. The article broke them down into categories, didn't it? Like apps, online platforms.
Podcasts, radio, streaming services like Netflix, YouTube, even audiobooks and things that combine listening and reading.
Right. And each of those formats caters to different learning preferences and situations. Take apps, for instance. They often use games, quizzes, interactive stuff.
Yeah, gamification, that can be really motivating for some people, keeps them coming back.
Definitely. Whereas someone else might be more, say, visually oriented. For them, maybe a platform that uses videos, like Fluent U itself, where you see the context, the expressions, that might click better than just audio alone.
That makes sense. Or think about someone commuting or doing chores. Podcasts are perfect for that, right? You can learn while you're doing other things. The article mentioned one Happy English podcast.
Ah, yes. Happy English. That one's great because it specifically tackles things like phrasal verbs and idioms. Those everyday phrases that often trip learners up because they're not literal.
Exactly. Things like figure out or get over it. Podcasts like that often break them down really clearly.
They do. And they often repeat them in different contexts, which helps solidify the meaning. Then you have resources aimed at maybe more advanced learners, like rough translation was mentioned.
Right, from NPR.
Yeah. That one dives into much more complex global stories and cultural nuances. So listening to that pushes your comprehension of higher level vocabulary and more sophisticated discussion styles.
So it's about finding the right level of challenge, too. Not too easy, not overwhelmingly difficult.
Precisely. And also finding topics that actually interest you. If you love cooking, find cooking shows or podcasts in English. If you're into tech, find tech reviews on YouTube. That intrinsic motivation makes a huge difference.
Yeah, you're more likely to stick with it if you actually enjoy the content. The article also brought up listening to things not specifically made for learners, like public radio stations, KQED or WAMU were examples.
That's a really important step, I think. Moving towards authentic materials. Listening to real news broadcasts, interviews, discussions meant for native speakers. That helps you get used to natural conversational speed.
The rhythm, the pauses, the way people might interrupt or talk over each other slightly.
Exactly. And the different accents you'll hear, even just on national public radio. It starts you to train your ear for the real world. not just the slower, clearer speech you might find in beginner materials. Even listening to something like BBC Sounds while British English broadens your exposure to different ways English is spoken.
Good point. And then there's the whole world of streaming Netflix, Hulu, whatever you use. The big advantage there is subtitles, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely huge. You can start with subtitles in your native language, maybe, just to get the plot.
Or get your bearings.
Then switch to English subtitles. That way you're connecting the sounds you're hearing with the words on the screen. It reinforces vocabulary, spelling, everything.
And you see the language used in context. You see the characters' expressions, their body language, which adds another layer of understanding, especially for things like sarcasm or, again, idioms.
Totally. That visual context is invaluable. You might hear a phrase like, "He really dropped the ball," and see the disappointed look on someone's face. And it clicks, he made a mistake.
Makes sense. And YouTube, it's just endless, isn't it?
An absolute goldmine. You've got channels specifically designed for English learners, like English Class 101 was mentioned, offering structured lessons on grammar, vocab, pronunciation.
Very targeted learning.
But then you also have, well, everything else. TED Talks are fantastic for more advanced learners, great exposure to different topics, formal presentation styles, diverse speakers.
And often with transcripts available too.
Right. Plus, you can find channels on literally any hobby or interest, like we said. Vloggers talking about their daily lives, tutorials, reviews. It's all authentic language practice.
And the ability to slow down the playback speed on YouTube can be helpful too, at least initially.
Yes, that's a great feature for catching tricky pronunciation or fast speech, though you want to gradually work towards listening at normal speed.
Okay, and the last category mentioned was resources that combine listening with reading, like Voice of America Learning English.
Yes, VOA Learning English is specifically designed for learners, often with slightly slower speech and transcripts. It's excellent for building foundational listening skills.
And then audiobooks from places like LibriVox, which has free public domain books, or Audible, following along in the physical book or ebook while listening. That seems really powerful.
It's incredibly effective. It connects the sound of the word with its written form very directly. It helps with pronunciation, rhythm, sentence structure, vocabulary acquisition. It hits a lot of points simultaneously.
So if we boil it all down, the key takeaway from the resources discussion isn't just here's a list. It's more about...
It's about embracing variety. Mix it up. Find things you enjoy. Find the right level. Use the tools available, like subtitles or transcripts, strategically.
And be consistent, right? Even 15-20 minutes of focused listening each day probably makes a bigger difference than cramming for hours once a week.
Absolutely. Consistency is king in language learning. Make it a habit, integrate it into your daily routine, and find ways to make it fun, not a chore. Experiment and see what clicks for you.
Okay, great foundation. Now, let's tackle something you mentioned earlier that often pops up in those listening resources, idioms. Our source from the EF Global site really hammered home how essential these are in everyday American English, both spoken and written. But why are they such a sticking point for learners?
Well, the core difficulty, as we touched on, is that idioms are, by definition, non-literal. Their meaning isn't predictable from the individual words. You hear, kick the bucket.
And you're picturing someone literally kicking a pail, maybe.
Exactly. But it means, to die. There's no logical connection between the words and the meaning unless you know the specific cultural convention, the code. So you can't just rely on your vocabulary knowledge. You need specific knowledge of the idiom itself.
It's like a secret language hiding in plain sight.
In a way, yes. And native speakers use them constantly, often without even thinking about it, because they're such a natural part of the linguistic landscape.
So, familiarity is everything. The EF site actually tried to categorize them by frequency, starting with the most common ones. These are the ones you're likely to hear or see almost daily. Getting a handle on these first seems like a smart strategy.
Definitely. Mastering these high-frequency idioms gives you the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak. It immediately unlocks a significant chunk of everyday communication. Plus, using them correctly yourself makes your English sound much more natural and fluent.
It bridges that gap, doesn't it?
Right.
Between sounding like you're reciting grammar rules and sounding like you're actually conversing.
Precisely. It shows a deeper level of understanding and integration into the language.
Okay, let's look at some of these most common ones they listed. A blessing in disguise. What's the feeling there?
That's when something seems bad or unlucky at first, but it turns out to have unexpected positive consequences later on. Like, maybe losing a job seems terrible.
Right. Initially devastating.
But then it pushes you to find a new career path that you end up loving. That original job loss was a blessing in disguise.
Got it. Okay, how about a dime a dozen?
That means something is very common, easy to get, and therefore not particularly valuable or special. Like, good programmers are hard to find, but mediocre ones are a dime a dozen.
Paints a picture of cheap abundance and beat around the bush.
That means avoiding the main point, talking indirectly or evasively, often because the topic is uncomfortable or sensitive. Someone might say, stop beating around the bush and just tell me what happened.
So, being deliberately indirect. I like the visual of circling around the important thing.
It's quite evocative, isn't it? Many idioms have these strong visual or metaphorical bases, which can sometimes help you remember them.
Okay, then there's break a leg. We mentioned this one briefly.
Yes, the classic theatrical good luck wish. It sounds negative, but it means good luck, do well. Especially before a performance. Never say good luck to an actor, apparently.
Right, it's considered bad luck, strange superstition, and call it a day.
That's a very common way to say you're stopping work or some other activity for the day. Okay, team, we've made good progress. Let's call it a day.
Nice and simple. Signifies completion for now. What about cut somebody some slack?
That means to be less critical or demanding of someone, to give them a break, maybe because they're having a tough time or they made an honest mistake. I know we missed the deadline, but his kid's been sick. Let's cut him some slack.
So showing a bit of leniency or understanding.
Exactly. Then you have cutting corners.
Ooh, that sounds negative.
It usually is. It means doing something in the easiest, cheapest, or fastest way, often by sacrificing quality or safety, or by ignoring the rules. The builders cut corners on the materials, and now the roof leaks.
Not good. It implies a lack of care or thoroughness. Okay, easy does it.
That's a gentle warning or instruction to slow down, be careful, act cautiously. You might say it to someone carrying something fragile or someone getting agitated. Easy does it, don't rush.
A calming phrase. Okay, get out of hand.
That means a situation is becoming uncontrollable or chaotic. The party started okay, but things got out of hand after midnight.
Losing control. What about get something out of your system?
This means doing something you've really been wanting or needing to do, often something a bit indulgent or expressive, so that you no longer feel that urge. Like maybe you need to have a good cry to get it out of your system, or go for a long run.
Satisfying a pent-up need.
Oh, okay.
And get your act together.
That's a more direct, sometimes critical instruction for someone to start behaving more effectively or responsibly, to organize themselves and stop messing up. You need to get your act together if you want to pass this course.
A bit of a wake-up call phrase.
Can be, yeah.
Yeah.
Depends on the tone, of course. Then give someone the benefit of the doubt.
That sounds more positive.
It is. It means choosing to believe someone is honest or that their intentions were good, even if you have some doubts or there's evidence that could suggest otherwise. I'm not sure he's telling the whole truth, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt for now.
Trusting despite uncertainty. Okay, go back to the drawing board.
That means an idea, plan, or project has failed, and you need to start over completely from the beginning. Well, that proposal was rejected. Looks like we have to go back to the drawing board.
Starting fresh after failure. Very common in creative or planning contexts. And hang in there.
A simple but really common way to encourage someone to persevere, to not give up during a difficult time. I know things are tough right now, but hang in there. It'll get better.
Offering support and encouragement. Okay, this is a long list of most common. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. That's used often humorously or maybe a bit impatiently to say that something isn't complicated or difficult to understand or do. Come on. Just follow the instructions. It's not rocket science.
Comparing it to something notoriously complex to emphasize simplicity? Okay, let someone off the hook.
That means to free someone from an obligation, a responsibility, or blame they were expecting to face. I was supposed to work late, but my boss let me off the hook. Or, he clearly made the mistake, but they let him off the hook.
Releasing someone from consequences. Got it. Make a long story short.
A very useful phrase. It signals that you're going to skip the details and get straight to the main point or conclusion of a story. So, make a long story short, I ended up getting the job.
Useful for saving time. Missed the boat.
That means you've lost an opportunity. You were too late to take advantage of something. I wanted to apply for that scholarship, but the deadline passed. I guess I missed the boat.
Opportunity lost. And no pain, no gain.
A well-known proverb suggesting that you have to endure suffering or hard work to achieve success or improvement. Often used in the context of exercise, but can apply more broadly.
Effort leads to reward. Okay, on the ball.
That describes someone who is alert, competent, quick to understand and react. She really knows her stuff and she's always on the ball. A compliment.
Being sharp and efficient, pull someone's leg.
This means to tease or joke with someone by telling them something untrue, just for fun. Are you serious? You won the lottery? Oh, wait, you're pulling my leg?
Playful deception.
No.
Okay, pull yourself together.
Similar to get your act together, but often more about regaining emotional control or composure when someone is upset, panicked, or falling apart. Take a deep breath and pull yourself together. We need to think clearly.
A call for emotional regulation? Almost there with this list. So far, so good.
A common way to report that things are progressing well up to the present moment, but acknowledging that problems might still arise. How's the project going? So far, so good.
Progressing okay currently. Speak of the devil.
You say this often with amusement when the person you were just talking about unexpectedly appears. Well, speak of the devil. We were just mentioning you, Sarah.
A funny coincidence phrase. That's the last straw.
This signals that your patience has run out after a series of problems or annoyances. It's the final tolerable incident that makes you react, often with anger or frustration. He was late again, forgot the report, and then spilled coffee on me. That's the last straw.
Reaching the breaking point. The best of both worlds.
This describes a situation where you can enjoy the advantages of two different, often contrasting things at the same time. Living outside the city but having an easy commute. That's the best of both worlds.
An ideal combination. Time flies when you're having fun.
A very relatable saying. It means that time seems to pass very quickly when you're enjoying yourself.
A common observation about perceived time. Okay. To get bent out of shape.
An informal way to say someone gets upset, angry, or annoyed, often unreasonably. Don't get bent out of shape about it. It was just a small mistake.
Getting disproportionately upset. To make matters worse.
You use this phrase to introduce an additional factor that makes an already bad situation even more negative. The car broke down, and to make matters worse, it started pouring rain.
Adding to the negativity. Under the weather.
A common, gentle way to say you're feeling slightly ill or unwell, not seriously sick. I'm feeling a bit under the weather today, so I think I'll stay home.
A mild way to express feeling sick. Okay, final few. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
This means let's not worry about a potential future problem right now. We'll deal with it if and when it actually happens. What if the funding gets cut next year? Let's cross that bridge when we come to it.
Deferring worry about future issues. Wrap your head around something.
This means to manage to understand something complex, confusing, or challenging. It took me a while to wrap my head around the new software.
The process of achieving understanding. You can say that again.
An emphatic way to show strong agreement with what someone has just said. Wow, that exam was hard. You can say that again.
Strong agreement. And lastly, your guess is as good as mine.
A simple way to say, I don't know, or I have no idea, implying the other person doesn't know either. What time will they arrive? Your guess is as good as mine.
Admitting lack of knowledge. Wow, that's a lot of most common idioms. Just internalizing those would make a huge difference.
It really would. And remember, the source also mentioned common idioms used regularly, maybe just slightly less frequently than the first batch. Still very important for comprehension.
Right. Examples there included things like the proverb, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, meaning it's better to hold on to what you have than risk losing it for something potentially better.
Exactly. A classic piece of advice. Or break the ice.
Which means to initiate conversation in a social setting, especially among strangers, to make people feel more comfortable, like telling a joke or asking a simple question to break the ice at a party.
Crucial for social situations. Then there's costs an arm and a leg.
An exaggeration, right? Meaning something is extremely expensive. I'd love that car, but it costs an arm and a leg.
Yes, hyperbole for high price. And it's a piece of cake.
Meaning something's very easy to do. Don't worry about the test. It's a piece of cake.
So these common ones add another layer of richness to the language you'll encounter.
And then there was a third category, familiar idioms. These are ones native speakers would likely understand if they heard them, but maybe don't use quite as often themselves.
That's the idea. Things like, a little learning is a dangerous thing, meaning knowing only a small amount about something can lead you to make bad judgments.
Or a snowball effect, where something small starts and grows bigger and bigger faster and faster.
Right, or burn bridges.
Which means to destroy relationships or connections, making it impossible to go back. Be careful not to burn bridges when you leave your job. You might need those contacts later.
So while you might not hear these every day, recognizing them still adds to your overall comprehension of the language and its cultural baggage.
It really feels like idioms are a massive part of the texture of American English. They add color, nuance, sometimes humor, but you absolutely need that familiarity to decode them.
You really do. It's not just about knowing the dictionary, it's about knowing these common metaphorical shortcuts. And a key part of achieving not just linguistic fluency, but that cultural fluency we talked about earlier. Learning idioms is learning culture, in a way.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so we've covered listening resources and the importance of idioms. Let's transition now to how these things play out in actual everyday conversations. Our source called Everyday Conversations gave some really practical examples, starting right at the beginning, greetings and introductions.
Yes, the absolute fundamentals of any interaction. Getting these right sets the tone and shows respect for social conventions. So the first impression.
So on the formal side, we have the time of day greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, pretty standard.
But the crucial distinction, which often trips learners up, is good night.
Right. You only use good night when leaving, or perhaps when someone is going to bed. Never as a greeting when you arrive somewhere in the evening.
Using good night as a greeting sounds quite strange to a native speaker, like you're ending the conversation before it even begins. A small point, but important for smooth interactions.
Definitely. Then formal introductions. They often have a specific structure, don't they? Like, Mr. Wilson, I'd like you to meet Dr. Edward Smith. Using titles, more complete sentences.
Yes, the formality is marked by the use of titles, Mr., Ms., Dr., Professor, and last names, and slightly more elaborate phrasing like, I'd like you to meet, or may I introduce.
And the typical responses are also polite and a bit formal. It's nice to meet you, or a pleasure to meet you, sometimes followed by repeating the name. It's nice to meet you too, Dr. Smith.
That repetition of the name is a good tip, shows you were listening and helps you remember it. The overall feeling is respectful, perhaps a bit reserved, suitable for business or more official settings.
Now, contrast that with informal greetings. Much more relaxed.
Oh yeah, hi, hey, hello, and questions like, how's it going, what's up, how are you doing? These are ubiquitous in casual settings.
And the expected answers are often short and positive, even if you're not actually feeling great, right? Like, good, thanks, not bad, pretty good, you.
Exactly. These initial exchanges are often more about social ritual than a genuine inquiry into your well-being, unless you know the person very well. It's about acknowledging each other pleasantly.
And informal introductions are simpler too. Maybe just pointing, that's your friend Mary, or Mary, this is my friend Jim, using first names. Much less structure.
Much more direct.
Yeah.
And the response is usually a simple, nice to meet you, maybe with a handshake or just a nod and a smile, depending on the context.
The source also mentioned contractions and intonation being key in spoken English. We use it's instead of it is, I'm instead of I am, constantly in informal speech.
Absolutely. Avoiding contractions can actually make you sound overly formal or even robotic in casual conversation. And intonation, well, that's huge.
How so?
It conveys so much emotion and grammatical meaning. Like rising intonation at the end of a sentence can signal a question, even if the grammar is statement like, you're coming to the party. Or it can show surprise or enthusiasm.
Whereas falling intonation is more typical for statements or information questions. Where's the library?
Right. And the stress you put on certain words can completely change the meaning. Think about, I didn't steal your wallet versus I didn't steal your wallet. Same words, different implications based on stress. Mastering intonation is a big step towards sounding natural.
Okay, so we've got greetings, introductions, intonation. Let's dive into some of those specific everyday situations the source highlighted. Talking about time, for example.
Ah, yes. Beyond just saying the numbers, like 7:15.
Right. Americans very commonly use a quarter after 7 or a quarter past 7. And for 7.30 you'll hear 7:30 just as often, maybe more often than 7:30.
Definitely. And for, say, 7.45, you'd hear a quarter to 8 or a quarter till 8. Getting comfortable with these quarter and half past formulations is really important for understanding schedules and appointments.
Good point. What about phone calls? The examples showed different levels of formality there, too.
Yeah. A casual call might just start with, hey, it's John, or hi, Alice, it's John. Very direct, assuming the person recognizes your voice or number.
But if you're calling someone you don't know well, or maybe asking for something, the language gets a bit more polite, more indirect, like, Hello, may I speak to Alice, please? Or, hi, I was wondering if you might have a moment.
Exactly. Using phrases like, I was wondering if, or would it be possible to, softens the request. And enthusiastic responses, like the example, sure, I'd love to, when accepting an invitation, use intonation to convey positive feelings clearly.
What about when things go wrong, like you don't understand someone? That happens to learners all the time.
Absolutely crucial to have some phrases ready for that. The source suggested simple, polite requests like, sorry, what did you say? Or, could you repeat that, please? Or, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
It's much better to ask for clarification than to just nod and pretend you understood, right?
Oh, definitely. Pretending can lead to much bigger problems down the line. Most native speakers are happy to repeat themselves or speak more slowly if you ask politely. The source even mentioned texting as a backup if the phone connection is bad, a practical modern solution.
True. Okay, what about those moments of coincidence? Running into someone unexpectedly.
Yes. Phrases like, fancy meeting you here, or the classic, long time no see, are common when you bump into someone you haven't seen in a while.
And if you discover some surprising connection, like you know the same person or grew up in the same small town.
The go-to phrase is often, what a small world. It expresses that pleasant surprise at unexpected connections. These phrases help build rapport quickly.
Makes sense. And then there's the universal topic, the weather.
The ultimate conversation starter, or filler. You need some basic weather vocabulary, things like, it's freezing outside, for extreme cold. Or maybe mentioning the wind chill, that's how cold it feels because of the wind, which can be much colder than the actual temperature.
Good one. Or simply, it's a beautiful day, looks like rain, it's really humid today. Having a few weather phrases lets you easily participate in that common small talk.
Exactly. It's a safe, neutral topic everyone can comment on.
Okay, moving on to making requests, especially in service situations, like ordering food.
Yes, politeness is key here. The example, can I start you off with something to drink? From a waiter is typical. Using can I, or could I, or may I, is standard for polite requests.
And as a customer, you'd use similar phrasing. Could I have the check, please? May I see the menu?
Right. Using please and thank you goes without saying in these interactions.
What about reporting something happening suddenly, like witnessing an incident?
The language might become more immediate, more exclamatory. The example was, that car just ran a red light. The word just emphasizes the immediacy, and the tone would likely be surprised or alarmed.
Showing urgency through word choice and tone. Okay, how about planning simple activities, like the shopping example?
Yeah, making suggestions often uses phrases like, how about baking some cookies, or why don't you get the chocolate chips?
And referring to instructions like, the recipe calls for 3 eggs. That phrase calls for is common when talking about recipes or requirements.
Yes, it means requires or needs. These are just the everyday ways people coordinate simple tasks and make plans together.
What about errands? The source mentions specific ways of talking about getting services done.
Right. Instead of saying, I will cut my hair, you typically say, I need to get my hair cut, or I'm going to have my hair cut. This structure, get or have something done, indicates you're arranging for someone else to perform the service for you.
So, I need to get my car serviced. I need to have my pants hemmed. That's a really useful grammatical structure to know.
Very common for talking about services like tailoring, repairs, haircuts, car maintenance, things like that.
Okay, let's imagine being at the post office. What kind of language might you hear?
You'd likely hear the clerk ask something like, what can I do for you today? Or how can I help you? A standard service opening.
And then you'd need to describe what you want, or maybe using specific terms like, I need to send this package via priority mail.
Exactly. Knowing the names of the services is helpful. And understanding how prices are stated, they might say $11.35 or more commonly just $11.35.
Good to be prepared for both ways. Okay, catching up with friends, asking about recent events in their lives.
Yeah, simple direct questions showing interest are common. How did your physics exam go? Or more informally, how'd your presentation go? Using how did or how was to ask about past experiences.
And the answers might be simple, it went well, or lead into a longer story, it opens the door.
Precisely. It shows you care and remember what's been going on with them.
Shopping for clothes, another common scenario.
Straightforward requests are best here. I'm looking for a sweater in a size medium. Or asking about availability. Do you have this in blue? Clear and specific.
Makes the salesperson's job easier too. What about discussing transportation options?
Practical questions like, Should we take a taxi or a bus? Making a decision together. And knowing basic location terms like bus stop or a subway station is essential for navigating. Isn't that a bus stop over there?
Basic survival English for getting around, talking about age.
Usually simple. How old is she? She's 10 years old. But the key thing this source probably highlighted is using ordinal numbers for dates.
Ah, right, like May 14th, not May 14th, or July 1st, not July 1.
Exactly. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. You need those ordinal numbers, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, when saying or writing dates in American English.
A specific grammar point that's easy to get wrong, okay? At the movies.
Simple transactions. 2 tickets for the 3:30 show, please, specifying the number of tickets and the showtime.
And politeness in shared spaces. The example was, would you mind moving over one seat?
Yes, would you mind is a very polite way to ask someone to do something that might inconvenience them slightly. Much softer than move over.
Definitely. Discussing preferences, like sports.
You might state it directly. I much prefer basketball to football. Using prefer or like better, or suggest an activity. How about a game sometime? Making a casual invitation. These phrases help you share your interests and arrange social activities.
What about after an event, like a play?
Expressing enjoyment is common. I really enjoyed the play. The actors were fantastic. That was a great show. Sharing positive feedback reinforces the shared experience.
Talking about vacations, people love talking about travel plans.
Absolutely. You might hear someone say, I just bought a ticket to New York City, sharing exciting news, or mentioning specific travel terms like taking the red eye.
Which means taking an overnight flight, right?
Correct. A flight that leaves late at night and arrives early in the morning. Knowing these little bits of travel jargon helps you follow the conversation.
Okay, pets. The example showed expressing an opinion with some nuance.
Yeah, dogs are more loyal than cats, but there's so much work. It shows comparing and contrasting, acknowledging both pros and cons, which is often seen as a balanced and thoughtful way to express an opinion, rather than just stating a strong, unsupported preference.
So, not just dogs are better, but showing you've considered different angles.
Exactly. It makes the opinion seem more considered.
And generally giving your opinion, how is that typically phrased?
Often softened slightly. I think we should go somewhere warm. I believe it's a good idea. Using I think, I feel, I believe, in my opinion, signals that it's your perspective, not necessarily a universal fact.
Or making suggestions like, how about going to the beach?
Yes, using how about or what about is a common way to propose an idea gently.
Talking about hobbies, what was noted there?
Often involves more informal language. Using gonna for going to is very common in casual speech when discussing future plans or activities related to hobbies. I'm going to go hiking this weekend.
And just generally sharing what you enjoy doing in your free time.
Right. It's a way to connect with people over shared interests.
Weddings. Big cultural event, lots of specific language.
Definitely. You hear expressions of admiration. Doesn't the bride look beautiful? And specific vocabulary. The reception, the honeymoon, the couple tying the knot, an idiom for getting married.
Knowing those terms helps you follow wedding-related conversations. The source also mentioned the word just having different uses.
Ah, yes. Just is a tricky little word. It can mean recently, I just got married. Only, I just want one piece. Or be used for emphasis. It's just beautiful. Context is key to understanding which meaning is intended.
Good point. Context is crucial. And finally, giving advice.
This can range from quite formal, perhaps you should consider, to very informal. The source mentioned more emphatic, informal phrases sometimes used between friends like, trust me, you should take that job, or I know so, it's the best way.
Adding a layer of personal conviction or reassurance.
Exactly. The level of formality really depends on the relationship and the seriousness of the advice.
Wow. Okay, that walkthrough of everyday situations really highlights how much specific language and sort of conversational strategy is involved in just navigating normal life in American English. It's not just random words.
Not at all. There are patterns, common phrases, expected ways of interacting for almost every common situation. Learning these specific scripts and patterns can make a huge difference in feeling comfortable and understood. It's like having a map for social interactions.
A map. I like that. Okay, let's shift gears again to something that can feel like a major roadblock even when you know the words and the situations. Accents and the overall American conversation style. We had insights here from a Reddit discussion and a Lingual Link DC.
Right. This is where things get even more nuanced, moving beyond the words themselves to how they're delivered and the cultural assumptions underlying the conversation.
The Reddit thread really struck me because it confirmed what so many learners feel. Understanding different American accents is tough, even with good English skills. It's not just you if you find it difficult.
Absolutely. The U.S. is a vast country with a huge range of regional accents. Southern drawls, Boston accents, New York cadences, Midwestern twangs, Californian vowels. They can sound incredibly different.
And the advice shared there was quite practical, wasn't it? Like, first try to pinpoint which accent is giving you trouble. Is it a specific regional one?
Yeah, identifying it is the first step. Then you can actively seek out more exposure to that specific accent through movies, TV shows set in that region, local news clips online, or YouTube channels featuring speakers from that area. Targeted listening practice.
And what about interacting directly with someone whose accent you find hard to understand?
The advice was generally to be polite but direct. It's okay to say something like, "I'm sorry, I'm still learning English and I'm having a little trouble understanding. Could you possibly speak a bit more slowly?"
Phrasing it politely, focusing on your own learning process.
Exactly. Most people will be understanding and try to adjust. The thread also brought up the idea of asking them to use more standard English, maybe avoiding very strong regional slang or pronunciation if possible, though that might depend on the person and situation.
And importantly, it wasn't just about the learner adapting. There was a sense of shared responsibility, right?
Yes, definitely. Several comments highlighted that native speakers also have a responsibility to try and communicate clearly, especially when they know they're talking to a non-native speaker. Being patient, maybe rephrasing things, avoiding overly complex idioms or slang. It's about meeting halfway.
That's encouraging. Communication is a team effort.
It should be. The goal is mutual understanding, after all.
The thread also mentioned General American or Standard American. What exactly is that? Is it a real accent?
Sort of. It's less a specific regional accent and more an accent that's perceived as lacking strong regional markers. It's often associated with national news anchors. And it's the accent most commonly taught to learners internationally. Think of it as a baseline or a relatively neutral point of reference.
So focusing on understanding General American first might be a good strategy.
It can be helpful, yes, because it's widely understood across the U.S., but it's also important to remember that most Americans do have some regional accent, and exposure to that variety is ultimately necessary for broad comprehension.
Which brings us back to listening practice. The advice echoed across all sources. Immerse yourself in American media.
Absolutely. Movies, TV series, podcasts, YouTube. The more you listen actively, the more your ear becomes attuned to the different sounds, rhythms, and intonations of American English in all its diversity. There's really no substitute for massive amounts of listening input.
Okay, so that covers the sound of the language. But what about the style of conversation? The Lingual Link DC article had some fascinating points about cultural norms, like the generally upbeat, forward-looking tone.
Yes, that's a common observation. American conversation often defaults to a certain level of optimism and positivity. Discussions might focus more on future possibilities or solutions rather than dwelling excessively on past problems.
And related to that, the idea of indirect criticism.
Right. Direct, blunt criticism can be seen as impolite or harsh in many American contexts, especially in professional settings. So negative feedback is often softened.
How? Like the sandwich method.
Exactly. You start with a positive comment, then deliver the criticism or suggestion for improvement, and then end with another positive or encouraging remark. Compliment, criticism, compliment.
So if you're from a culture where feedback is very direct, you might almost miss the criticism hidden in the middle.
You might. You have to learn to read between the lines sometimes, to pick up on the more subtle cues or the suggestions for improvement that are actually the core message. Understanding this indirectness is key to interpreting feedback correctly.
Interesting. But then, paradoxically, the article also mentioned that Americans value directness in getting to the point. How do those two things fit together?
It seems contradictory, doesn't it? But I think it means Americans often appreciate efficiency in conversation. They generally prefer people to state their purpose or main point relatively early on, rather than engaging in lengthy, rambling preambles. So while the criticism might be softened, the overall structure of the conversation often values getting down to business. Avoid beating around the bush in terms of the topic, even if you soften the specific feedback later.
Okay, so it's a balance. Be positive, maybe indirect with criticism, but don't waste time getting to your main reason for talking.
That's a good way to think about it. It reflects a cultural value placed on both politeness positivity and efficiency action.
The article also mentioned a problem-solving focus, a can-do attitude.
Yes, very much so. There's often an underlying assumption that problems can be solved, and conversations might quickly turn towards finding solutions, proposing actions, figuring out the next steps. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? Is a common implicit or explicit question.
Action speaking louder than words.
That sentiment runs deep. There's a focus on practicality and achieving results.
What about interruptions and silence?
Ah, yes. Compared to some other cultures, interruptions might be more frequent and sometimes more tolerated in lively American discussions. It can be seen as a sign of engagement or enthusiasm, a way to jump in and contribute. Waiting for a long pause before speaking might mean you never get a chance to talk.
So, learning how to politely interject might actually be a necessary skill.
In some contexts, yes. Finding that right moment to add your point without seeming rude. And silence. Americans in general can be somewhat uncomfortable with long silences in conversation. There's often a tendency to fill the gaps with talk.
Which leads us to small talk. It's not just meaningless chatter, is it?
Yes. Not at all. The article called it social glue, and that's a perfect description. Small talk about the weather, sports, weekend plans, non-controversial current events serves a vital function in warming up interactions, building rapport, and establishing connections before diving into deeper topics.
And it tends to be positive and somewhat reciprocal.
Generally, yes. You offer a bit of positive information about yourself, had a great weekend, went hiking, and you're expected to ask a similar question back. How about you? Did you do anything fun? It's a back-and-forth exchange that shows mutual interest. It might seem superficial to some, but it serves an important social purpose.
So, mastering small talk is actually a key skill for navigating American social and even professional life.
Absolutely. It's the lubricant for social interaction.
And finally, the article stressed cultural fluency going hand in hand with linguistic fluency. What does that really mean?
It means that knowing the grammar and vocabulary isn't enough. True communication involves understanding the cultural context, the unspoken rules, the values, the assumptions that shape how people use the language. It's about knowing how to say something appropriately in a given situation, not just what to say.
Like understanding the indirectness, the role of small talk, the discomfort with silence.
Exactly. And maybe even adjusting your own behavior slightly to align with those norms. When appropriate, not to lose your own identity, but to communicate more effectively and build better relationships in that specific cultural context. It's about understanding the different cultural filters people use.
Learning the choreography, as you put it earlier.
Yes, learning the steps of the cultural dance that accompanies the language. It requires observation, empathy, and a willingness to learn beyond the textbook.
So, wrapping this all up, our exploration today really underscores that getting comfortable with American English conversations is about way more than just language lessons in the traditional sense.
Definitely. It's this complex interplay of listening skills, vocabulary, including all those idioms, understanding common conversational patterns for everyday situations, tuning into accents, and, crucially, developing that cultural awareness, that cultural fluency.
And the payoff for putting effort into all these areas is huge, isn't it? It's about moving from feeling confused or hesitant to feeling genuinely confident and able to connect with people.
Absolutely. It makes interactions less stressful, more enjoyable, and ultimately more meaningful. You're not just decoding, you're participating fully.
So for everyone listening, the encouragement is really to, well, keep listening actively. Pay attention not just to the words, but the music behind them, the intonation, the pauses, the idioms. Notice the cultural styles.
And don't be afraid to ask. Ask for clarification. Ask about idioms you don't understand. Ask native-speaking friends about cultural norms. Curiosity is your best tool.
And be patient with yourself. This stuff takes time. Learning the language is one thing. Learning the culture and the nuances of conversation is another layer entirely.
Exactly. Every conversation, even the ones where you feel a bit lost, is a learning opportunity. Recognize your progress, however small it feels. It all adds up.
Okay, before we finish, here's that final thought we wanted to leave you with. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the indirectness, the positivity, the small talk, the problem-solving focus, how might developing a deeper understanding of these American cultural conversation norms actually unlock new doors for you? Not just in understanding, but in building connections, maybe in your career or just in your personal relationships.
That's a great question to reflect on. How can cultural fluency become a bridge, not just a tool for comprehension, but a tool for deeper connection and opportunity? It really elevates language learning beyond just words and rules.
It really does. Food for thought.
Indeed.
Today, we're really getting into the weeds on U.S. healthcare. It's complex, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And you, our listeners, have given us a great set of resources to work with.
Yeah, a really interesting mix. We've got KFF on employer-sponsored insurance, ESI, which is a huge piece of the puzzle.
Plus, a general overview from Wikipedia, some insights on challenges from the Nashville Healthcare Council.
Department of Labor data on drug spending, which is always a hot topic.
Right. And then a look at single-payer ideas from PMC, Mental Health America's perspective, and even VA.gov on the Veterans Health System.
So our mission really is to take all this great info and make sense of it. How do most Americans get covered? What are the biggest headaches in the system?
And are there other ways to do things? We want to cut through that complexity, keep it clear.
Exactly. Okay, so let's dive in. Where do we start?
Well, that KFF source really hammers home one point right away. Employer-sponsored insurance, ESI, it's just dominant.
It really is. It's the main way people under 65 get their health coverage in the U.S.
Which, is quite different from a lot of other developed countries where the government usually guarantees basic coverage.
Right. And this reliance on jobs for insurance, it has knock-on effects everywhere.
Definitely. The KFF data for March 2023, over 60% of non-elderly folks had ESI.
But here's the kicker, and this really stood out to me. It's massively tied to income.
Oh, absolutely.
Explain that.
Well, if you're earning more, say, over 400% of the federal poverty level, something like 84% have ESI. Huge number.
Okay.
But if you're below 200% FPL, that number just plummets down to, less than 24%.
Wow. So right there, your access to the most common coverage is linked directly to how much you earn.
Exactly. It's not universal. It's a benefit that favors higher earners. That seems fundamental.
It really is. It shows how our system ties health security to your job, to your wages for so many people.
Yeah.
And KFF also found that about 81% of workers actually work for a company that offered ESI back in March 23.
So the offer is pretty widespread for workers.
No.
It seems so. And of those offered, 93% were eligible. So, roughly 3/4 of workers could get ESI at their job.
But like you said, being offered it and actually signing up, two different things. Cost plays a role, I assume.
A huge role. KFF shows about 74% of those eligible workers actually took the plan. They became policyholders.
Okay, so what about the others?
Well, another chunk, maybe 14-15%, they get covered as dependents on someone else's employer plan. So still linked to employment.
Right.
But then you have others relying on Medicaid or public plans, maybe 4.6%. Some buy their own non-group plans, that's 2%.
And then there's the uninsured group, still around 3.7% of eligible workers.
Exactly. And the cost? Well, KFF puts the average premium in 2023 at over $8,400 for one person.
And nearly $24,000 for a family. That's a lot of money.
It is. And the employers share that. It's now almost 7% of total compensation for private industry workers. It's a major part of the cost of employing someone.
And how much the worker chips in varies too, right? Depending on the company size.
It does. That's another interesting wrinkle from KFF. In 2023, if you worked at a small firm, about 30% of workers with single coverage had it fully paid by the employer.
Okay, fully paid. That sounds good.
Yeah, but compare that to large firms, only 6% had fully paid single coverage.
Wow, big difference. What about family plans?
Kind of the opposite story there. At small firms, almost a third, 32%, had to pay over half the family premium themselves.
Ouch.
Whereas at large firms, only 8% paid that much of the family premium. So your personal cost burden can really depend on where you happen to work.
What do you think about the regulations, like the ACA, the Affordable Care Act? Doesn't that mandate coverage for larger employers?
It does, yes. That's a key piece KFF explains. If you have 50 or more full-time equivalent employees, you generally have to offer health benefits.
And they have to meet certain standards.
Right. Minimum standards for coverage and affordability. If employers don't meet those, they can face penalties.
So there are rules trying to ensure the coverage is actually useful.
Kind of. There are tests for minimum value. Does it cover at least 50% of typical costs? And affordability. Does the employee contribution exceed a certain percentage of their income? It gets complicated.
And then there's the tax benefit. This seems huge for why ESI is so common.
Oh, absolutely crucial. As KFF points out, the money your employer pays for your health insurance, it isn't counted as taxable income for you. not for federal income tax, not for payroll taxes.
So getting health benefits is way better financially than just getting the same amount as extra salary and buying insurance yourself.
Precisely, because you'd pay taxes on that salary first. KFF even gives an example for someone in a certain tax bracket. A dollar spent by the employer on health benefits might only cost the employee about 63 cents in take-home pay.
That's a massive built-in incentive for this employer-based system.
It really is. It's been around a long time.
Okay, so ESI is dominant, powerful, has tax advantages, but it's clearly not covering everyone and creates these income-based divides.
Exactly. Which leads us naturally into the bigger system-wide challenges. And the sources paint a pretty stark picture there, too.
Where do we even begin with the challenges? Access seems like a good starting point.
Definitely. And the fundamental point, like Wikipedia notes, is that the U.S. just doesn't have universal health care, unlike most other wealthy nations.
We have this patchwork system instead.
Right. The 2017 numbers they cited are still basically true. You've got maybe 150 million on employer plans, 70 million on Medicaid, 50 million Medicare, 17 million on ACA marketplaces. It's fragmented.
And that fragmentation means people fall through the cracks.
Inevitably. And even if you have insurance, access isn't guaranteed, is it? You mentioned provider networks earlier.
Yeah, the narrow networks issue. Wikipedia flagged that 73% of ACA marketplace plans in 2017 had limited choices for doctors and hospitals.
Which can mean traveling really far or paying a lot more out of pocket if you need specific care or a specific specialist.
And the Nashville Healthcare Council brought up the provider shortages, especially in rural areas. That seems critical, too.
Absolutely critical. Their example from Tennessee, 55 out of 90 counties having no OBGYN at all. That's a crisis for maternal health right there.
It's genuinely frightening. And it's not just if there's a doctor, but how long you wait to see one, even with insurance.
Right. Wikipedia mentions that while U.S. wait times for routine stuff might be okay compared to some places, plenty of patients face long waits, sometimes similar to the UK system.
And you have to assume it's worse for the uninsured or underinsured?
Logically, yes. The Nashville Council also mentioned consumers waiting weeks, even months, for appointments in some areas. That delay can have serious health consequences.
And just having the insurance card doesn't mean the care gets approved easily, does it? Prior authorizations. That seems like a growing frustration.
It really does. The Nashville Council highlighted Medicare Advantage plans. Specifically, they denied about 6% of prior authorization requests in 2021.
6% might not sound huge, but with millions in those plans.
It adds up to a lot of delayed or denied care. It's a bureaucratic hurdle for patients and doctors alike.
And all this is happening while costs just keep going up and up and up.
Relentlessly. The Nashville Council's projection is sobering. Healthcare spending growing faster than the whole economy, potentially hitting nearly 20% of GDP by 2031.
20%, that feels unsustainable.
It does. And you see the pressure points. They mentioned 67% of healthcare leaders reporting more claim denials from insurers.
Which means more paperwork for hospitals, more delays for patients.
Exactly. And costs rising internally, too. They gave that example of Vanderbilt Adult Hospital's expenses jumping 19% in just 1 year, 2022.
Wow. A big part of that pressure must be staffing, right? The nurse and doctor shortages we hear so much about?
A huge part. The Nashville Council cited estimates of 100,000 nurses leaving post-pandemic, and that McKinsey survey from March 23, 40% of hospital RNs thinking about leaving within a year.
That's a potential exodus. And doctors, too.
Yeah, the projection is a shortage of up to 124,000 physicians by 2034. These aren't small numbers. They directly impact patient care access and quality.
And then there's the sheer inefficiency, the administrative burden, that 30% figure for admin costs.
Right. From Wikipedia, back in 2013, nearly a third of spending not going directly to care. It's a constant point of criticism compared to other systems.
It just feels incredibly complex to navigate.
It is. And finally, let's not forget prescription drugs. That's where people often feel the cost pinch most directly.
Definitely. Higher deductibles, higher copays.
Exactly. The Department of Labor data shows employer plans are definitely shifting more costs onto members. Higher out-of-pocket maximums, more tiers for drugs, meaning brand names cost a lot more.
And that point about direct-to-consumer advertising, that's unusual, isn't it?
Very. Wikipedia notes only the U.S. and New Zealand allow it. And there's definitely an argument that those Ask Your Doctor ads drive up demand and prices for expensive new drugs.
Okay, so it's a real tangle of challenges. Access, costs, staffing, complexity, drug prices. And these problems don't hit everyone the same way, do they? Which brings us to equity.
That's absolutely crucial. All these challenges are magnified for certain groups. We already saw the ESI data showing disparities by income and race, but it goes deeper. Wikipedia mentioned how uninsured people are less likely to get preventative care, and those awful stats about minorities having lower cancer screening rates.
And worse outcomes, like higher death rates for colon cancer among Black and Hispanic individuals. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. And it's not just about getting care, but the kind of care. There's research cited by Wikipedia suggesting bias in treatment decisions.
Like minorities, particularly Black Americans, may be getting less intensive or less advanced treatments.
Sadly, yes. Especially when it involves expensive new technologies.
Right.
And the National Council pointed to systemic issues racism baked into the system itself.
How so?
Underrepresentation, fewer Black medical students, fewer Black researchers getting NIH grants, and a huge lack of diversity in hospital leadership. That 2019 stat, 89% white hospital CEOs versus 60% white population, tells a story.
It certainly does. And we have to talk about mental health here, too. Mental Health America highlighted huge gaps.
Absolutely essential. Their 2020 data. Nearly 53 million adults with mental illness, but less than half getting treatment.
Less than half. Why?
Stigma is still a massive barrier, but also practical things. Not enough mental health professionals, especially in certain areas or for specific groups. It's an access crisis within the broader access crisis.
And Wikipedia noted mental health conditions are incredibly costly, too.
Among the most costly, even back in 2006. So the failure to provide adequate mental health care has huge economic costs, on top of the immense human suffering.
Okay, so faced with all these deep-rooted problems, cost, access, equity, it's understandable that people talk about fundamentally different approaches, like single payer.
Right. That idea keeps coming back. PMC looked into this. It's definitely gained more traction in recent years.
And the appeal is pretty clear, isn't it? Potential for cost control, universal coverage.
Those are the main arguments, yes. The idea that if the government is the single payer, it can negotiate much lower prices for everything and ensure everyone is covered, regardless of their job or income.
And that's a big but. The hurdles are massive. PMC laid those out pretty clearly.
Extremely clearly. Politically, it's a huge mountain to climb. You've got incredibly strong opposition from the private insurance industry, which is, very powerful and deeply embedded.
And recent history hasn't exactly moved away from private insurance, has it?
Quite the opposite, as PMC points out. Many reforms have actually given private insurers a bigger role. Plus, there's public skepticism about whether the government could run such a huge system effectively.
Trust in government isn't exactly at an all-time high.
No. And then just the sheer complexity of implementing it in the U.S. system with states' rights, separation of powers. It's daunting.
And even defining what single payer or Medicare for all means seems to be a challenge.
That's a really key point PMC made. The terms are used differently, sometimes meaning purely government-run, sometimes allowing supplemental private insurance. This lack of clarity confuses people and makes it harder to build political momentum.
They mention Kamala Harris's shifting stance as an example of that confusion.
Exactly. It illustrates how tricky the politics are, even for proponents.
So while single payer is debated, we do have a large government-run system already operating, the Veterans Health Administration.
We do. The VHA is a very different model within the U.S. context. VA.gov outlines its priorities: improving access for veterans, boosting quality, making the experience better.
And it seems to focus on integration and collaboration.
Yes, working closely with veteran service organizations, tribes, states, other agencies. It's an integrated delivery system, directly providing care to its specific population. It's not insurance, it's healthcare delivery.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, what's the big picture? We have this dominant employer-based system, ESI.
Which works well for many, but leaves significant gaps and has major fairness issues tied to income and job type.
And the overall system is wrestling with huge challenges. Access problems like provider shortages and narrow networks, runaway costs, staffing crises, administrative bloat, and deep inequities.
And while big reform ideas like single payer exist, they face enormous political and practical roadblocks in the U.S. The VHA offers a different model, but for a specific group.
So listeners should now have, hopefully, a much clearer, more nuanced picture of U.S. healthcare, drawing from all these different expert perspectives.
That's the goal. Understanding the landscape, the good, the bad, and the very complicated.
Which leads us to a final thought for everyone listening. Given everything we've just discussed, all the complexities, the competing forces, the challenges, what do you think is the most critical thing we need to fix?
If you had to pick one area to focus on to really improve healthcare in the U.S., what would it be? Access, cost, equity, something else.
And maybe think about what kind of innovative ideas might actually work to bridge some of these divides we've talked about. There are no easy answers here.
Definitely not. But hopefully, this deep dive gives you a better foundation for thinking about them. We encourage you to dig into the sources yourselves if you're interested.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.